welcome to my book report on the Stepford Wives. Just kidding, this is a booktube channel. If you already know me and you like my videos, I would recommend subscribing. And if you're new here, hello, welcome. We're talking about a classic horror novel today. I just only recently found out that this even was based on a novel. I didn't know this. I didn't know about this author at all. Ira Levin wrote The Stepford Wives, classic horror movie. He also wrote Rosemary's Baby, another classic horror movie. I have not seen the original 1975 Stepford Wives. I have seen the weird 2004 remake with Nicole Kidman, and I have seen Rosemary's Baby, which is one of my favorite kind of... I really like classic horror because it's not that scary by today's standards. And hey, it's October, so I was looking for a book that I could read that would be like creepy, but I'm kind of a baby about horror, and this is the kind of novel where all of the really sinister stuff happens off screen, so to speak. We don't really... a lot of stuff is implied. You don't see a lot of stuff that you don't want to see. It just makes you feel creepy, and it's a thinker. It gives you stuff to think about. So, I'm going to format this video by not spoiling this story. I'm going to talk about the non-spoilery stuff first, and then once I get to the twist ending stuff, I will tell you. Because while I think it's unlikely that anybody who's watching this doesn't know the ending, because, you know, there were 2 movies made of this book, and it's also just like a big cultural thing. I feel like people know what it's about and how it ends and stuff. But I do personally wish I could have read this without knowing all of that. I think it would have been a better reading experience, and so I don't want to ruin that for anybody. If you're, say, I don't know, just young enough to not know how this ends, I won't tell you. So, what is The Stepford Wives? It is, first of all, a novella, which is another thing I didn't know when I got this out of the library. I put it on hold and I picked it up and went, wow, this is like 100 pages. I read it in 3 hours. It's a very short, I would say thriller, really, more than horror, but, you know, thriller/horror novel about a couple, Joanna and Walter. Joanna is the main character. We are primarily in her perspective throughout this story, and she's just moved into this house with her husband and her 2 kids, and they're in suburbia. They're in Stepford, and things start to get weird very quickly. She meets one of her neighbors, and she invites her over, you know, just sometime, but specifically she says, hey, you know, maybe tonight after you put your kids down to sleep, you could come over, have a drink or whatever. And the woman says, like, oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't, I have to wax my floor. And she's like, tonight? At night? You can't put it off for one night? And she's like, oh, no, I'm sorry, I really couldn't. And basically every time she tries to make plans with any of the women or become friends with them, they all say the same thing. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm too busy. I have to clean. You know how it is. I just have to clean all hours of every day. And her husband, Walter, is invited to join the Men's Association, and he decides that he is going to go to the first meeting of the Men's Association, and Joanna is pissed about it because she's, how does she put it, into the women's liberation movement. You know, it's the 70s. Women's lib. You don't hear that very often anymore. You know, she's a feminist, and she doesn't like the idea of her husband joining a group that explicitly does not allow women in. And he says, I know, it's archaic, but I'm gonna go meet some people and I'll try to change it from within. So, and she says at the beginning of the book that, you know, her husband is himself, you know, into the women's lib thing. And so, you know, they're brainstorming together about how they can maybe make some changes in this neighborhood. But again, she quickly finds out that not only are these women not available to spend any leisure time doing anything ever at all, but also all of the men are in this men's association, and they meet every night, basically. And she doesn't know what they do because she's not invited, but they get to go to this mansion house where they have their meetings, and all of their wives are at home cleaning. And none of this is sitting very well with Joanna. And so she decides that she's going to try to start her own women's club, and she invites a bunch of women from the neighborhood, but not a single one is interested. And eventually she does make a friend. She puts out a kind of rallying call in their little neighborhood newspaper thing about this, and a woman gives her a call and is like, oh, thank God, I just moved to the neighborhood, and finally a like-minded person who's not a cleaning zombie. And so they become friends. She makes these two different friends who are not cleaning zombies. One likes to play tennis, and the other one is just kind of like a brash, funny woman with some personality, and it's all very refreshing to hang out with those two. And I will leave the people who don't want to be spoiled with this. Eventually one of those women, the tennis player, Joanna goes over to her house to hang out like they normally do, maybe play some tennis, and she is acting like the other women in the neighborhood. She's like, no, I don't have time, I have to clean, and she's actually having her tennis courts. She owns tennis courts. This is a wealthy neighborhood, we're to assume. She's having them removed, and she seems strangely calm about it. She's like, well, I don't have time for that. I should be spending more time with my family. So that's the non-spoiler synopsis, and I will get into my feelings about it before I start talking about the ending. So I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I think it's a really good book. I think it's very interesting to me that the Stepford Wives, as well as Rosemary's Baby, which I'm probably also going to read, are written by a man. I think that's cool. I think he did a pretty good job of writing from a woman's perspective. I didn't feel like it was... Nothing really stood out to me as being incorrect in that sense. It is an explicitly feminist type of story. And as a thriller, in terms of the plot and everything, I thought it was very good. Writing style wise, it's a novella. It's very short and to the point, so we don't get a lot of depth into these characters, but I don't really think that's so much the point. I'm kind of okay with that. I think it was pretty well written. I don't know if I should say there are a lot of references. It's possible there's a lot of references compared to your average novel, or it's possible that I noticed every single reference because I almost never knew who they were talking about, I'm a regular so-and-so. 70s references, I don't know. There's definitely a lot of stuff that I just... which is reason to not make a ton of references in your novels if you want to be a classic, because people in the future are either going to have to look this stuff up every couple pages or just be lost. I decided not to look anybody up. I didn't really know. So what else? Yeah, I just thought it was very good. Maybe I should get into the ending stuff. Yeah, I'm going to do that now. So goodbye to those of you who want to go read the book. I do recommend it. And hello to people who either have already read the book or just like spoilers and like knowing what's going to happen before they read it. So yeah, if you don't already know the twist, it's very well laid out because Joanna starts going through the archives in the library, which no one goes to. I like that as a detail for this is a zombie town with no personality and no intellectuals. No one ever goes to the library. Not even the men, but whatever. And so she goes there into this empty library, and she goes into the archives, and she looks at this community newspaper thing, and she sees that they used to have a women's organization. And some of these women who told her that they would never ever be interested in that, were members of it. One of them was the president of it, and so that's really disturbing. And then she looks into some of the career information on all of the men and puts together that a lot of them are in manufacturing and tech, and one of them is in charge of animatronic design at Disney, and he designed these very lifelike robots. At one point, before we get the big reveal, Joanna does compare the women to robots, and it's this little foreshadowing or just a clue. And I wonder, would I have figured it out if I didn't already know? I'm not that good at predicting stuff. But so yeah, they're robots. The men are murdering them, having them murdered, whatever, and replacing their wives with robots. It's a really interesting metaphor for, not really caring about having an interesting person that you're married to and just wanting them to clean for you. Also, in terms of this being written by a man and him writing a woman's perspective, there is like this sort of cliche thing where there's a lot of description of boobs in this book, but it's for a reason because Joanna is noticing that all of the women in this town like really big boobs, like every single one of them. And when her friend goes through that transformation, she even looks different, and yeah, they're killing their real wives, turning them into making robot versions of them, and the robot versions have bigger boobs and different bodies. So I just thought that was an interesting example of something that as a male author you probably shouldn't harp on, and is something that is criticized and made fun of a lot, but in this case it had a purpose. So she wasn't just, it's relevant to the plot. Also, I forgot to mention, but I guess I'm sort of glad I didn't because it's kind of towards the end. There is some racial commentary in this book, which I think is important because this is obviously height of suburbia. I mean, this is a neighborhood, the neighborhood that redlining leads to. It's almost completely white. One black family moves in, and there's this interesting internal commentary from the main character where she hears that this family's moving to town, and then she sees this woman, and because she's the only black woman anywhere, the main character's she must be the one who just moved in. And she has this internal thought process where she's I should go say hello so she knows that she's welcome here. And then she thinks no, she'll just think I'm a pandering liberal, whatever. And then she thinks, well, would I say hi if she weren't black? Yeah, I would. It's this whole, she's going through this whole thing of trying to be a decent person, and it's interesting, and I thought it was pretty realistic to the internal white nonsense. And yeah, I thought that was well done, and it also provides an interesting plot aspect. Like I said, I think it's important to incorporate race into this suburbia criticism, because it's not just women who are suffering from this ideal, right? Not just white women, I mean, not just one category of person. There's also intersectional identities. And so also it was interesting from a plot perspective because this woman, Ruth Ann, when she moves to town, she knows that everybody's being weird, but she's also is it because I'm black? And it makes an interesting layer of kind of throwing her off the trail of okay, this is just a town full of very weird white women who are weird. But unfortunately that probably makes it, we're left on a bit of a cliffhanger with her, but we know what's inevitably going to happen to her probably, and it probably doesn't help that she has this sort of red herring of a reason why this is all happening, although this does feel like a very white idea to turn your wives into robots. So that's the Stepford Wives. I feel like I just explained the whole book mostly, but don't know what much to say about such a short book other than it was good. I recommend it. I had a good time. And yeah, I thought it stood the test of time pretty well, other than the references that I didn't understand. I thought from a feminist perspective, it does a pretty good job. Having a woman's perspective, pretty good job. The racial commentary kind of thin, but it's a very thin book. That's one point I guess I could make. Things that could have made it a 5-star for me. Possibly, if I didn't know the ending when I read it, that might have been pushed it over the edge, because I do think it's a really cleverly designed thriller with good twists, but I already knew what they were. The other thing, though, is I do think, like, as much as I love a short book, it could have been way longer. It could have characterized people a lot more, could have done more with that racial commentary. Yeah, it just could have done more. And another thing, I can't compare to the movies because I saw the 2004 movie, like, in 2004, and that's a while ago. I don't really remember. And I never saw the 1970s one. But one thing I remember from the 2004 movie is that it does go a lot more in depth into what the men are up to. Like I said at the beginning of this video, one of the reasons why it's not really scary is because a lot of the scary stuff, like, you don't see anybody get murdered. You just know that that's what's happening. And in the 2004 movie, it's much the same. You don't, like, see that, but you do get to see the men's perspective and more of what's going on with them. And even in the movie, I wanted more of that. Like, I think this book would have been interesting, maybe with multiple perspectives. You know, like this, yeah, he could have written an entire 100 other pages from the husband's perspective, right? And we could have done an alternating point of view thing. And then we would get to see the husband go on this journey from, like, supportive feminist husband to, like, you know what, they're making a pretty good point about these robot big tit wives. Like, I could use one of those. Like, that's a really interesting journey, and we don't get to see that. And it is, I guess it's cool in, like, a sinister, creepy way that we just have to imagine what that's like. But I want details, you know, like, I kind of want to go into that mansion where the men are and, like, hear their conversations and how they convince one another to do this. Like, at what point in the process of them moving there do they reveal that this is the case? Like, has any man ever left? Has any man in the history of this ever said, like, nah, no, I want a real spouse who breathes air and, like, has ideas? No, thank you. So it's a novel driven by ideas more than it is driven by characters, and so it doesn't have, like, a ton of depth to it. I think it's just meant to make you sit and think, and that's cool. But yeah, I am left wondering what it could have been like if it had been, like, twice as long and been a different sort of novel. Okay. How are we feeling? We feel good? Did you like this video? Please subscribe, like, share. Sorry, I kind of forget how to talk like a human. It's pandemic times, and I don't talk to a whole lot of people, and then I sit down and I try to talk to the internet and just hoping for the best. But thank you for watching, and that's it. Bye.